to the next of our short videos looking at the elements of negotiation as suggested to us and broken down by Patton. There they are on your screen now. And the one we're going to be looking at today is the element of relationship. We begin with a quote from Michael Watkins, who makes the perhaps challenging contention that most negotiations are linked to other negotiations past, present and future. He then, I think, quite emphatically says there is no such thing as a self-contained standalone negotiation. Now, you might want to reflect on that. We'll look at a couple of examples in this short film, maybe to try and test Watkins' proposition here. Here's one example. When not being a jobbing academic, I, in my past, have been a local part-time trade union representative on behalf of academic colleagues. There I am there. And my duties would include negotiating on a variety of topics, representing members' interests individually in casework such as disciplinary action and grievances. More collectively and very onerously, I was part of the negotiating team negotiating over redundancies at my university a number of years ago. On a more day-to-day basis, the trade unions would meet with human resources representatives on a regular basis to talk about ongoing matters, policy developments, things that were happening with the institution that may have an impact on staff, and try and get a common view as to how we would best go forward together on that. Now, this is all on top of my normal duties as a jobbing academic, of course, teaching students, researching, doing commercial work and so on. What I'd like you to think about then is, as a union negotiator, who were the people and the relationships with those people that I needed to have in mind as I went about my business as a trade union negotiator. Now, I suggest you might want to pause the tape in a moment and just jot down some of the other parties that I may be negotiating with, but whether I was directly negotiating with them in a particular context or not, that I needed to have in mind in terms of my relationships with them. And then once you press play again, I'll give you my ideas as to who I had in mind as I went about my business negotiating on behalf of my members. Okay, so here are some of the people that I would think about when I was negotiating with them. Now, whether I was negotiating directly with them or whether they were, as it were, in my mind somewhere outside the room, these were the people that were relevant to my life as a trade union rep. Number one, of course, my employer. The employment relationship is how we term it. The contract of employment is simply a legalisation of what is an ongoing relationship in which both parties have to behave in good faith towards one another. And I could not divorce that relationship of employment from my, as it were, side activities as a trade union negotiator. Managers, both individually and collectively, I needed to think about my relationships with them. And in particular, I needed to think about whether it paid for me to be grandstanding in a particular negotiation where perhaps the union's case was very strong, because I might need to come to those managers the day after tomorrow in a different context and I might be looking for something from them. So I needed to think very carefully about how I manage the relationship I had with my managers. My co-workers, I needed to think about that. I'm a member of a community here, as we all are as employees, and I suppose in terms of my interests, I would like to feel accepted as a member of that community. So how I behave as a trade union rep, I knew people would be forming impressions about that, whether I was negotiating on their behalf or whether they were simply fellow employees. I needed to think about what they might make of my actions and what assumptions they might make about me as a result of that. I was also the local rep, and I would rely on support from my union headquarters. I also needed to, as it were, toe the party line, so I needed to think about my relationship with central support from the branch, or rather not from the branch, from headquarters of the trade union. My members, my local members, 3 of them around me in this particular photograph, I needed to think about them and whether I was leading them appropriately, whether I was understanding what they wanted, whether I was representing their collective views appropriately, and again, what would they think of me as their local rep? They wouldn't necessarily be present in any given negotiation sitting at the table, but they were outside the room. And I needed not only to be mindful of them, but I wanted the people I was negotiating with, managers and so on, to be aware of the fact that I wasn't there as an individual, that I was representing a collective voice of my membership. And of course, students. It was obvious to me that everything we do as a community of scholars has an impact on the students that we teach. And in an extreme example, such as withdrawing your labour, going on strike, as we have occasionally in relation to pensions in this case, you think about the impact that that has on students, and you think about, well, what happens after this? How do we recover from this? What effect has this had on our relationship? So again, even though it's an indirect involvement in a particular negotiation, for example, to bring about the end of industrial action, nonetheless, I'm thinking about the ongoing relationship within this very complex social network that is a university. I'd be curious to know what you came up with in terms of the various relationships, but this example was really just to show you the kind of web of relationships that are present either directly or indirectly, and we should be thinking about past, present and future when we go into a negotiation. Finally, the self. I need to live with myself. I need to be consistent with who I am. I need to be able to look myself in the mirror and think that my actions are consistent with the person I want to be, the person I aspire to be, the person I want the world to think I am as well. There's the internal dimension of relationship, and Patton talks about this in his chapter 2. What about our transacting couple? The woman with the car to trade in and the dealer offering her the price. Now, here we have, he's some way apart from her in terms of their initial positions. We've looked in a previous film about the underlying interests that motivate them to take up those positions. Let's just remind ourselves again of those interests. And as we look at them, think about how many of them are actually about thinking about relationship. Now again, it's easy to think in the modern consumer world that there is no past, there is no future, there is only the present, there is only the deal to be done today. Actually, there's a web of relationships, I would argue, present even in what we would call a spot transaction in the consumer world. If you look here, the trader on the left, as you look at the screen, is saying, I want repeat business from her and her family. So he's thinking about future relationship, and not just from her, but from the people that she can influence either to be his customers or not. He's also thinking, as it were, upstream about the relationship he has with his employer in order to satisfy his own performance targets and so on and so forth. And looking at the seller of the car, the consumer in this case, she's thinking about doing a good deal that serves well her relationship with her family, but also she knows that having a reliable local trader, someone that she can go to and that she can trust, is worth it. It's something worth having, and so that is influencing her performance, her behaviour in this negotiation in order to think about what happens next. Again, if we reflect back on Watkins' statement, we can maybe see if there's an echo of truth in what he says. So relationships matter, even in ways that are not necessarily apparent at first, even with people that aren't necessarily present directly in the negotiation itself. They also matter because it isn't just remember about the what we're negotiating, but about the how we're negotiating. And McGinn says that the negotiation sends a status message. The way we interact, the way we behave towards each other is a message about how much you value me and our relationship. And he goes on to say, the way in which conflict is handled is a defining element of interpersonal relationships affecting development, maintenance and erosion of ties between the parties. How you treat me today as your customer, for example, will determine whether I come back to you, but also what I say to you, what I say about you, to others. And in a very networked world where we have access to virtual platforms of social media and so on, this is very important. So how we behave with each other on the spot influences the relationship that we're going to have, not just for the now, not just for hopefully getting to some sort of deal or agreement today, but what will happen after today. What, if any, relationship will we have? What, if any, relationship will we have with others? How will that be influenced by how we're actually behaving towards each other today and the messages that we're giving each other in doing so?